Good morning and welcome to our first post-Easter Fireside Reflections.
First post-Easter ever.
Yeah. Online. It's great to
Yet
have you
another new.
with us. This morning, our topic is going to be about the resurrected Jesus. It's kind of a fun way to take it. Instead of using the gospel, we're going to talk through St. Paul and his first letter to the church in Corinth, Greece, which we know as First Corinthians. And it's a great, he's very humble in it. He talks about his own history, so listen for that. He validates the resurrection numerous times by giving the names of people and places and numbers of people that have witnessed this event. And then he talks about his own self and the way he sees himself as one of these messengers of God. So from 1 Corinthians chapter 15, these are Paul's words. For I handed on to you as of first importance what I in turn had received, that Christ died for our sins in accordance with the scriptures, and that he was buried, and that he was raised on the third day in accordance with the scriptures, and that he appeared to Cephas and then to the 12. Then he appeared to more than 500 brothers and sisters at one time, most of whom are still alive, though some have died. Then he appeared to James, his brother, then to all the apostles. Last of all, as to one untimely born, he appeared also to me. For I am the least of the apostles, unfit to be called an apostle, because I persecuted the church of God. But by the grace of God, I am what I am, and God's grace toward me has not been in vain. On the contrary, I worked harder than any of them, though it was not I, but the grace of God that is with me. Whether then it was I or they, so we proclaim, and you have come to believe. Beautiful words.
Beautiful words. And they're actually really packed. And it's interesting that with the resurrection, a lot of times I think we tend to think of the account that we hear on Easter morning, a lot of times in church, about the women, Mary, the other Mary, and Mary Magdalene coming to the tomb at first dawn. And we can tend to think of the resurrection as that kind of that one-time appearance on Easter morning. But one of the many things that this passage that's so packed is talking about are the many appearances beyond that first one.
Right.
And I think about how the way that TV works, which is and maybe you've seen some of these things that talk about like the hidden secrets of the Bible or something like that. And there's some people I think who might hear this passage and say, why haven't we heard about this? Who's hiding this or whatever?
The Da Vinci Code,
right?
syndrome,
like the Da Vinci Code. Why are the conspiracy things? And it's really just that Easter. We tend to talk about Easter just on Easter Sunday. We don't tend to talk about it, throughout for the other, 51 weeks of the year. And so there's a lot of passages that talk about the resurrections in addition to Easter morning, but Easter morning, we tend to focus on that one.
Yeah. We go with the Gospels because the Gospels are the point of it all. Mm-hmm. And that's actually Paul's authority is this understanding that these accounts from the disciples who are different than the apostles. So let's just run with that for a moment. So the 12 disciples are the 12 men that lived and ministered with Jesus while he was alive. And then apostles are the ones who follow Christ after he is deceased. So after and resurrected. So you have the apostle Paul, who was not a disciple, but all the disciples actually became apostles with the exception of Judas for obvious reasons. So that's kind of interesting. But But Paul's work, and it's his last line, so that's really interesting, where he says, whether then it was I or they, meaning the disciples, so we proclaim. We're telling the same story, we're giving the same message. So if you, church in Corinth, are wondering about the authority, my authority versus the authority of those who lived stories.
Saying, and by saying, we proclaim these things, and then by naming so many different people, locations and time spans, that he's saying, one of the things that I love about this passage is he's saying, look, this is something that I want you to check out. This is verifiable.
Right.
This is something that is widely known. This isn't some kind of esoteric type of a thing. It's not a secret. They're not trying to withhold information. He's laying out as many cards on the table as you possibly can. And not only that, but then people might say, well, the Bible's written afterwards or whatever, and how can you check these things out? So this book in itself, fascinatingly, through literary forensics, because of certain notations of events that took place. So this was written in either 34 or 35 AD. Jesus died, as we know now through history, thanks to science, thanks to geologists, and some of that has to do with the earthquake that took place when Jesus was being crucified. That they verify right through the Dead Sea, and so they through all these different forensics, which is fascinating to get into at some other point. So Jesus, when did Jesus die? April 3rd, 33 A.D. This was written 1 to 2 years after, which is an incredibly short period of time afterwards. I mean, it's immediate as far as that goes, and with that kind of immediate closeness from the resurrection itself to when this was written, Paul is saying, check it out. It's widely known. And the wonderful thing is, then he goes through and he names, when you're listening to it, some of these references might just go by, one right after another. But just, listen to when we break down all of the different references.
Yeah. Well, he says
about.
that he appeared to Cephas, which is an important one because Cephas then left and went to Corinth, Greece. And so he was kind of the resident of the resident representative, the official representative of this new story. So he actually carries a little bit more weight than Paul does. And that's why Paul mentions him, that he first appeared to Cephas. So that they would know, okay, if you question what I have to say, ask him. He knows even more than I know. And then to 12, and then to more than 500 brothers and sisters at one time, many of whom are still alive. So go talk to them.
Right. And of course you realize, well, of course they're still alive. Why? Because it's only been a year or two afterwards. So he's writing this, he's writing this for, again, just, one of the things that we love, right, is the multiple layers that happen in this very, very packed, a couple of sentences, really, that he is both giving what's understood. This is understood to be the earliest creed of the entire church, when the church is only 1 year old, and saying, okay, this is what's important. This is of first importance. Christ died. He's buried. He was raised on the third day. So that creed that we all understand was right there from the very, very, very beginning. And sometimes people talk about, well, weren't things developed hundreds of years later in the Council of Nicaea and so forth? It's like, yeah, they were agreed upon, but this is in writing immediately
from the beginning,
right? So he's doing that, and then naming the people, like you said. So Cephas, naming one of the 12. The 12 are known. They're living. They're walking around. They're available. Check it out with each one of them. More than 500. So you don't, when you're trying to make something up or whatever, you don't say, come here, open the door, ask the questions, talk to the people. They're alive. I'm going to tell you where they are. I'm going to tell you who they are. That's what you do, when you're telling the truth or let's say if you're in court and if you're being accused of something, then you rush to say, no, no, talk to this person, talk to this person, talk to this person. And that's kind of the energy that's behind this. Instead of saying, oh, I kind of forgot. And,
Right. And that's one of the really notable things about Jesus too, is that he never did anything hidden. He never did anything outside of mass groups of people, large groups of people. There's none of his healings that take place between just one or two people. They're always witnesses. He's not hiding anything. And even his death is public. He's hanging there in public on the cross for all to see, right outside the gates of the city. He's dead. Everybody verifies it. The Romans, after they know that he's dead, stab him with a sword just to make sure. Everybody knows he's died. Everybody knows where he's buried, in the borrowed tomb of Joseph of Arimathea. Everybody knows that the Roman guards are there taking care of it. The arch enemies are the ones in charge of protecting this thing, so that this exact thing doesn't happen.
Right. Yeah.
And
so like, why are they? Why are the guards there?
That's why they're there.
They're there to make sure that someone doesn't go, because he said he was gonna rise up. So what is the government who's trying to quelch this kind of insurrection? What do they want to do? They are highly motivated to say, okay, well, let's make sure that somebody doesn't go in and steal the body and make sure that and start spreading that rumor. So it makes sense why why guards, to prevent that from happening, right?
Yep.
And then the other interesting thing in terms of the verifiability, that I love about this, is with the empty tomb, right? Which is, as you're mentioning, the easiest thing to verify, really, of anything. And how do you verify an empty tomb, right? If you say, well, the tomb is empty, we buried him. Does everybody know he was buried? Yes. Then they say it's an empty tomb, and what do? Right? To prove that, you go to the tomb.
Yeah.
You go to the tomb, where, whose tomb it was, like Joseph of Arimathea. And so all the government or anything that anybody wanted to do would have to do is you just go to the tomb, you open it up, and you go, no, you're not telling the truth. Here he is, right here. Story's gone. Nobody does that.
No.
So why does anybody do that?
Right.
Because it's not, because the body's not there, and they were trying to protect that body.
Yeah. And just rewinding just a little bit to the conversation about the timing of Paul's letters, it's really important to remember, as Paul Whitmore said, that these letters were written within a year, 2, 3, 4, 5, where the Gospels, because of their length and the import of them and the need to verify the facts and make sure, it took 30, 40, 50, 60 years before they became widely spread. Remember, there's no printing press or anything, so they're all handwritten copies of these stories. So it took much longer for the Gospels to get around and written, but Paul's letters were occurring right after these events. And so people don't, we tend to think that the Gospels are the first books, but it's really Paul's letters that give us this whole, and including the book of Acts, which gives us this birth of the church and this understanding of how this message went from Jerusalem and greater Galilee to the reaches of the world as best that they could do at that time.
The other fascinating thing about this passage and the whole kind of sequencing of events has to do with some of whom people who Paul named as being the 12 disciples and he himself. And then you just rewind that to just before the crucifixion itself, and you say, okay, so at this point they're saying he's appearing to massive groups of people. Ask anyone, they will tell you. You back up just a little bit and you say, what happened just before the crucifixion, when the disciples were asked, do you know him? And they said, including Peter, they said, no, we don't even know him. Why were they afraid to say that they even knew him? Because they would get
They were
killed
next, yeah.
along with him. So, that's when they would still, let's say, have motivation to, to say, no, I mean, we knew him obviously because here he's still alive. So they're afraid of being killed. Now, after Jesus dies, if the resurrection does not happen, who is killing and persecuting Christians, he's safe, he has a position of authority, he's incredibly respected, he has money, physically he's not going to be harmed or anything. What motivation do any one of these people now have to say, no, Jesus is resurrected? Because by saying that, now when they're safe, they immediately put themselves into peril, physical peril, social peril, economic peril. And in terms of, being hunted down and killed, when all they have to do is say, no, that's really not true. But then every single one of these people who are named in terms of the disciples and Paul himself, while being perfectly safe, they say, no, this is absolutely true, that he was, dead and buried, and that he was raised, and that's really what they are being killed on. And so it's both a matter of faith, but then it's just a matter of logic, and um, and and how we behave as human beings.
And it's a huge risk because we know all but one of them were tortured to death
Right.
over this. Yeah. And that's another, like, if you're perpetuating a lie, do you, at the point of being flogged or flayed alive or burned or your head chopped up, which has all happened to all of these guys, wouldn't you at some point go, wait, just kidding, like, no, this, I'm part of this huge conspiracy, I'm lying, but not one of them does, right? One of them goes to these horrid deaths for that point. And I think that just back to, of course, Paul probably understands that at some point he's going to die because of this. I mean, I think they all understand that their days are limited, and they got far more years, I think, than anyone ever anticipated that they got. But they were so intent on making sure that this message of the good news got out, that this understanding that Christ lived, Christ died, and Christ was buried, and Christ was resurrected is, it's the foundation of Christianity. It's, and people often, I think that Christianity is a set of rules to live by, or a spiritual path you have to go through, or political, commentary, which it has some of all of that in there. But the base of it is this understanding that Christ lived, Christ died, Christ was buried, Christ was resurrected. And that's the foundation. That's what Paul's saying. This is what you have to know and you have to believe, because this is the most important.
Yeah. And not just sitting by itself. It's not just, so if we know this fact, then we're a Christian and it's all done with, and that's good. But to know this, to know that,
in light of all
the died, buried,
Yep.
Resurrected. Why? Yep. It's the why that carries the power.
Yep.
The why is because the love, because the message is so important that not just Jesus really, but all of the 12 disciples and Paul and hundreds of martyrs, each one of them is willing to go through torturous death so that the truth and the integrity of the message is of the message of love, profound love, profound acceptance, social justice, caring for the poor, serving. No personal gain out of this whatsoever. There's zero personal gain. Nobody made any money off of this. Right. Nobody had it, created any personal status off of this. The only reason why every single person sacrificed everything that they had is just to promote love
and grace,
which is
love and grace. And Paul even says this, right? And this is a great line from Paul: by the grace of God, I am what I am. And that alone is 17 sermons unto itself, right? By grace of God alone, I am what I am. Nothing that we can do or will ever be able to do earns us the blessings that we have. It's by the grace of God alone that that the blessings come, and not that some are given to others and others are not, that's a whole nother sermon. But I think our time is where we have to save that for another sermon. But it's just a beautiful line: by the grace of God, I am what I am. And then he says, and God's grace towards me has not been in vain. Like these blessings, these gifts have been given, this new understanding, the gift of being able to see the resurrected Christ and talk to him, and then have this ability to go and tell people and to write. He's
share the truth,
a beautiful writer.
God.
All those are gifts from God.
Yeah.
And then he goes on and says, but not through me. He wants to say me. You can hear this internal battle with him. It's me. No, it's not me. It's God, and then he finishes it out, though it was not I, but the grace of God that is with me, that allows all this to happen.
Incredibly selfless. And I would love, and kind of as I referred to, last Sunday, that sometimes we become so familiar with this that we hear these mind-blowing, profound, statements like this one in the scripture today, where when you hear something like this, the natural response of a human being should be to say, hey, wait a minute. Whoa, this doesn't necessarily make logical sense, in that this is, people, I don't see people usually behaving like this, giving their entire lives. So why would not one person do this, but why would hundreds of people, do this? And it just begs us, it invites us to look further, to just, to ponder, to have it hit us, to not just kind of skim the surface, and keep going, because it's just profound. And I would just be curious, if somebody never heard anything like this before, I think it would have more impact. I think that we become so familiar with it that it unfortunately it loses its impact unless we slow down enough to just sit with it and have it touch us.
Sorry.
We're okay. Everybody's okay. So and as far as that goes, I know you had a closing statement, and I had something that just a very short quote that I love from Albert Einstein that talks about this, and then you can share if I can find it. I might not be able to. And then you can share your quote. And
I don't have a quote.
I think it might be here. Oh, a
not
poem?
quite sure.
No?
And I don't have a poem either.
Oh. Well, then I'll just share this little.
You can share
little,
yours.
Little thing from,
I think
Albert
I spoke
Einstein.
all
Oh.
my thoughts, but I can just go. Maybe next week we talk about, because one of the things that is interesting that Paul alluded to a little bit is that it's not just the what we think of as the disciples and the Apostle Paul that carried this message. There is this whole commissioning that Christ does, the resurrected Christ does, of sending multitudes of people out to tell the story, which is another great story. There's so much in the Bible that's crazy that we can't always, even if we preached every week for all of our lives, we wouldn't be able to get to where we need to go.
Yeah.
So maybe that can be next week, so we can tell that story, and because I think it's interesting how the message got out there so quickly and how fast over so many continents. I mean, they went to Egypt, they went to Africa, they're in Europe, they're in Asia, they're in I mean, they're everywhere
at a time when you think about travel,
right?
We'll save that.
And we'll save that next.
So here's a little quote from Albert Einstein that I love, and he was so brilliant, as we know. He said, "There are two ways to be fooled. One is to believe what is not true. The other is to refuse to believe what is true." So, smart man,
and a man of faith.
And a smart, not just here, but I think we want to be smart here.
One of the things people don't know about Albert Einstein. He was a spiritual man as well.
So,
all right.
Shall we?
We shall. Shall we end with our Lord's Prayer? All right. Join with us. Our Father, who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done, on earth as it is in heaven. And give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our trespasses, as we forgive those who trespass against us. And lead us
Lead us
not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. For thine is the kingdom, and the power, and the glory
the
forever.
glory forever.
Amen. See you later.
See you later.